that I'm going to be sending up to you next is more complicated. Still quite a simple design, but it's more complicated, and it runs it can run for a long time, and runs in the same direction all the time. It runs off 4 batteries, each of them 1.5 volts. So when you've got 4 1.5 volt batteries, you end up with 6 volts. 1.5, 3, 4.5, 6. So we've got 6 volts that we're powering this little motor with. I'll just give you a quick rundown how this little motor works. So we've got an electromagnet there, and we know from our previous little motor that when we put electric current through a coil of wire, it forms a magnet. It has a north pole and a south pole, the same as an ordinary magnet. So in this case, what we're doing is we've got 4 little permanent magnets, just the same sort of thing that you see on a fridge magnet. They're quite powerful. They're rare earth magnets, these ones. So we've got those positioned evenly around this little armature, and that's just made out of a piece of wood that I had in the shed. So what happens is that we need to get this coil to energise. We need to put some current through it. And when we put some current through it, if we've got opposite poles, say this is north and this is south, then that will just pull there and stay there. It won't move. It won't go anywhere. That's not really what we want for a motor. So we need to be able to switch things on and off so that we can get it to move. So what actually happens is we've got a little switch here. It's not like a light switch, but it's called a reed switch. And all it is a little set of switch contacts that open and close, but they're inside a glass tube so that there's a vacuum in there. There's no oxygen, so we won't get any oxidization. So the switch contacts will remain clean all the time. So that's all that is a little switch just doing that. So it's just like taking 2 wires, joining them together or breaking them apart. So that's what we're going to use to turn this electromagnet on at the right time. And we've just got one other little device that we use, because this reed switch, if you try to switch that big coil on with the little reed switch, it would just burn out and melt. So we're using a transistor here at the back here, and that little transistor helps us turn this big coil on, and it stops this from getting burnt out or melted. So that's what that little device does there. It has 3 terminals, and each one of them has to be connected exactly how the circuit diagram that I'll give you shows how to connect it. It's probably a bit much for you to understand how that works. It's a transistor, a semiconductor. Okay, so what basically happens with this little motor is that, say we start off here. When this magnet here is close to this reed switch, it turns that reed switch on, so the contacts close. When the contacts close, they put a current through this coil. And when that coil gets a current going through it, it forms the magnetism. And say, for instance, this is the north pole. That will remain constant. Whenever a current goes through, this will be the north pole. But if we've got these magnets in our armature positioned so that all of them have the north pole facing out, whenever this switch turns on, there will be another north pole facing this magnet. And as we know with magnets, if we have 2 north poles together, they want to push apart. So what will happen is that this other magnet will be pushed away from this coil because it doesn't like having the north pole next to it. So it pushes away. And as it pushes away, it turns off this switch. So now this is no longer any magnetism in this electromagnet. And so this then moves freely because there's nothing holding it back or pushing it. It just keeps going with its own momentum. But very quickly after, another magnet comes in contact with this switch and turns it on again, which then turns the coil on, which then creates a north pole, and then another magnet is opposite again and gets pushed away. And so this just keeps on repeating, and the motor just keeps spinning. As you can see, I will turn this little battery pack on. As you can see, it keeps spinning. And it builds up quite a substantial speed. I would say that's probably turning around 1,000 revolutions per minute. And that will just keep going. Not like the other motor, but this one will just keep going while the battery's just turn it off. So that's how that little motor works. Okay, and what I've done is provided you with that little motor so you can see how it works and see how it's all assembled. But half the fun in these things is actually putting them together and making them work. So I could have said, why don't you pull that apart and then put it back together? But I've provided you with another kit so you can make up a complete motor yourself. I've got the armature and all the holes are drilled, and I've provided the wire, the screws, the magnets, the transistor, the resistor, the reed switch, all the little parts, the wire, the base at the bottom, all the plates I've drilled out so that they'll all work for you. You've got to wind your own coil. The wire for the coil is there, and then there's another battery pack as well. So all of those parts you put together and you can make another one of those. Now there will be some situations while you're assembling it that you probably won't really understand exactly what's going on, but you've got that one there to copy. There's a few little things that you might not know. Well, there's probably a lot of things that you might not know, but you'll learn as you go along. This wire that I'm giving you to wind the coil with is what they call enamelled copper wire. So it looks like it's just copper, and it looks like that would all just short together because all the turns are touching each other, but that's not the case. The wire has been coated with a very thin enamel. So you imagine just painting on an enamel that insulates the wire from itself. So we can wind the coil, and none of those wires are touching together. But the thing is that when we need to solder it, we need to actually scrape. So we get the ends of the wire after we've finished winding the coil round and round and round and round and round and round, and you want to wind it so it's roughly about that same size. You don't want to make it too much bigger or too much smaller. A little bit won't matter, so just roughly get it the same size, and that'll be about the same amount of turns. But when you want to solder it, you need to get a little razor blade or something and scrape that insulation off so you can solder it. So you need to scrape it all the way around the wire, just in a little bit, maybe only a few millimeters. And then you can solder it and tin it, and then you can solder it to where you need to solder it. And you'll see on the other one where it's been soldered. You need to be careful and take your time with that. You don't want to put too much heat in, but you need to put enough heat in so that the solder runs. The other thing that's a bit interesting or a bit puzzling, and it probably will cause you a bit of time to figure it all out. So when we put these little magnets, I've drilled the holes there for them to go in, but and they'll be a bit tight because we need them to be tight in there so they stay. We don't want them to be flying out when it's spinning. So there's 4 little magnets in there. But what you need to do is figure out which is the north and south pole. So when we've got the little magnet and it's flat, one flat side will be north and the other flat side will be south. But we don't want to have this one with the north facing out and this one with the south facing out. We need them to have all the same. But we need them to be the right way. So we need to have those magnets, the side facing out needs to be able to be pushed away by that coil. Now, depending on which way you've got that coil connected when you make it, will determine whether you have the north or the south facing out. But they all need to be the same. If you put them in wrong, it will just go around and then it will stop. It'll stop right where it is, because we know that a north and a south will attract. So we need to have either all south or all north. So the magnets need to be the right way, and they all need to be the right way. So that'll be a little test for you to figure out how that goes. when I did mine, I found it a little bit difficult to work it out. But once I was able to, work out which pole this was, then what I did, I marked all the magnets with a texter, and then so I could put them all in the right way. And you have to really push them in. You might need to get something to just tap them in, because I've made that hole really tight. That's probably really about it, but you don't need to make it in one day, you don't need to make it in 1 week. You might want to think about it for a while, but you can slowly put it together. Everything should be there. There's screws, there's little springs, there's everything that's on this one. I've given you another one of, so you can put it all together. But don't get annoyed by it or stressed by it. Even if you just put one part on in 1 week and then the next week you put another part on, but it needs to all go together correctly. Otherwise it won't work. One little thing wrong, put one wire wrong, or one magnet wrong, or one thing wrong, and it just won't work. So that it's a combination of all those things that make this switching happen, and it's quite an exciting thing to do. I used to make these things when I was a kid. I designed my own designs and made them up out of things I had in my bedroom or I could find lying around, or I just loved it, because this principle of the electromagnet is probably changed the world more than anything else that's ever been invented.